Please pay your attention to the emergency evacuation plan. In case of emergency evacuation, please follow the exit sign to escape out of the building. The assembly point located on the opposite sides of the hotel building, security guards and our staff members will assist you until the situation is clear. Emergency evacuation procedure. First, when alarm sounds, leave immediately by the nearest exit. Second, proceed in an orderly manner to assembly point. Last, remain at assembly point until all clear is given.
Excellency Mr. ประเสริฐ จันทระ รวงทอง Minister of Digital Economy and Society, distinguished guests, members of media, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, for me, on behalf of the Office of Personal Data Protection Commission of PDPA, would officially like to welcome all of you here to the event of the PDPA International Conference 2024 held by PDPA under the campaign of Take Control of Your Data or ตะโกนให้โลกรู้ข้อมูลส่วนตัวสำคัญที่สุดนะคะ You are here with me. My name is Ploy Jantit. I'm very honored to be here today to officially launch this significant event, and a very good morning to all of you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, as you may already know that PDPZ Thailand is the organization with primary responsibility of protecting personal data as well as promoting and supporting the development of personal data protection in this country. This includes providing education, guidance, handling complaints related to the Personal Data Protection Act BE 2562 and conducting inspections and oversight using modern technology. PDPZ recognizes the importance of raising standards and advancing knowledge regarding Thailand's PDPA laws to align with international levels and keep pace with constantly changing global trends. That's why today we have invited both of Thai and international experts to join us in this PDPA International Conference event in order to share with you the experience, share some thoughts, share their way under the theme of key global trends in data privacy together. And our seminar program will be divided into two sessions. For the first morning session, in the topic of ASEAN Model Contractual Clauses, MCCs, and in the afternoon session, we have the topic of AI impact on data privacy. So I am sure we are going to have a lot of useful information today in order to develop the data privacy together in the international levels. But before we proceed to the seminar, may we start with the official opening ceremony of the PDPA International Conference 2024 Key Global Trends in Data Privacy by inviting Secretary General of the Personal Data Protection Committee, PDPA, up on the stage here to present a report to the chair of the event. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Siwarak Siwamoksatham ka. Please, sir.
Dear Minister ประเสริฐ จันทระ รวงทอง the Minister of Digital Economy and Society, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the PDPA International Conference 2024 Key Global Trends in Data Privacy. First of all, I would like, on behalf of the Office of the Personal Data Protection Committee, I would like to express my deep gratitude and appreciation to the Minister of Digital Economy and Society for kindly attending and presiding over the opening ceremony of the conference today. This event is organized in order to raise awareness among data controllers, data processors, as well as the general public. The conference also aims to increase the level of understanding about the personal data protection laws and regulations in accordance with the international standards. Our today's discussion will unlock the power of ASEAN model contractual clauses or MCCs so that participants understand the terms and conditions in contracts in order to facilitate secure transfer of personal data across borders between ASEAN member countries. Participants will also gain valuable insights from experts on how to effectively implement ASEAN MCCs and overcome challenging limitations. Additionally, the conference will have discussions about the impact of artificial intelligence or AI, which is a hot topic right now, on personal data protection and the balance between AI innovation and personal right protection. The discussion will also include risk assessments as well as the appropriate PDPA compliant use of AI in practice. Now, without further ado, I would like to invite the Minister of Digital Economy and Society, Mr. Prasert Jantararongthong, to officially declare the opening of the PDPA International Conference 2024, Key Global Trends in Data Privacy. Thank you.
Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to preside over the PDPA International Conference 2024, Key Global Trends in Data Privacy. Today, with the mission of raising awareness about international data protection laws. Today, business and marketing are driving with data along with emerging technology like big data and AI. Because of this, the transfer of sharing of personal data across countries is happening more and more. This creates opportunity for data exposure and misuse. As a result, there have been a global awakening and awareness regarding the right to personal data protection, as well as the role and responsibility of those legally obligated to manage personal data and the enforcement to law by relevant authority. The PDPA law in Thailand is modeled after the EU GDPR, which is the personal data protection law of European Union. Its purpose is to safeguard personal data and prevent malicious actors from hacking or violating data privacy. The PDPA law in Thailand is comprehensive personal data protection law and with ability to identify the data owner. This data can be in form of document, paper, publication, or electronically stored information. The PDPA law came into full effect on June 1, 2022. Under Prime Minister Sethar Thavisin, this government highly prioritized personal data protection. And as a Minister of the Ministry of Digital Economy and Society, I have set forth guidelines and measures to elevate our country's personal data protection standard. The Office of the Personal Data Protection Committee of PDPC is actively promoting awareness through prevent, beware, understand, initiative to educate the general public, government agency, business. Moreover, PDPC provides consultation service and handle companion through various channels, following framework adapted from the globally recognized standard. Elevating Thailand personal data protection standard to gain international recognition is a crucial mission because Thailand needs to exchange data with various countries globally. However, some aspects of Thailand data protection standard may not yet align completely with global standard. Therefore, there must be measures to enhance Thailand standard to ensure confidence from foreign entities in transforming personal data to Thailand. This will foster development in the trade and investment sector. The use of AI is tricky for PDPA. AI processing involves personal data from multiple sources and often include international data transfer. The risk arise from excessive use of AI to process personal data beyond its intended purpose, potentially leading to eventual breaches of personal data. Therefore, the conference aims to raise awareness about international law on personal data protection. This conference intended for data controller, data processor, and the general public to enhance understanding and elevate awareness of personal data protection standard in Thailand to meet global benchmark. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, with that said, I would like to officially declare the opening of the PDPA International Conference 2024, Key Global Trend in Data Privacy. It is my hope today that everyone will gain valuable knowledge and insight to PDPA through in-depth discussion with experts and various topics. I hope that this event will help fostering confidence in personal data protection in Thailand and elevating our country's standard to align with global level to excellence in personal data protection moving forward. Let us all raise awareness and utilize this platform to exchange diverse viewpoints. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Please remain on the stage as we are going to have the memorable photo together. And next, may I invite our executives to join our minister on the stage. May I invite Mr. Wei Thang Puong-sap, Deputy Permanent Secretary for Digital Economy and Society. May I invite Mr. Suthikiat Virakit Phanit, Advisor to Minister of Digital Economy and Society. Next, may I invite Mr. Wallop Ruchirakorn, Secretary to Minister for Digital Economy and Society. Next, may I invite Mr. Poranon Thitawanno, Committee in the Supervisory Board of the Personal Data Protection Committee PDPC. Next, may I invite General Puchapong Pongsiri, the Chairman of the Expert Committee of the Personal Data Protection Committee PDPC. Last but not least, may I invite Dr. Siwarak Siwa Moksatham, Secretary General of the Personal Data Protection Committee PDPC. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause for our executive, please. Thank you. And here is a face that helps lift up the personal data privacy in our country and try to draw another useful information from the international level in this international conference for all of you, for our people in Thailand. And please all remain on the stage. In order, we would like to have the next memorable shot together. And next, may I invite all PDPC executives to join other executive and other minister on the stage, please. A big round of applause for other PDPC executives ค่ะขอเสียงปรบมือด้วยนะคะให้กับท่านผู้บริหารจากทาง PDPC นะคะ Everyone knows that personal data and information is a very important information that no one cannot get it. But nowadays we have a lot of technology try to track out your data, right? So we try to build some laws or some regulations in order to protect your data privacy. So you can make sure that all of your information is private enough. And this is actually not only the personal issue, this is actually come to the country issue as well. To protect your data is to protect your country information too. วันนี้มีสื่อมวลชนหลายท่านนะคะขออนุญาตนะคะอาจจะมีหลายกล้องนิดนึงด้านหลังนะคะขออีกสัก 2-3 ช็อตนะคะวันนี้มีสื่อมวลชนจากหลากหลายสำนักเลยนะคะขอบคุณมากๆที่ให้เกียรติมาร่วมงานกับเรานะคะ Thank you very much, and may I invite our PDPC executives to relax and have a seat downstairs, please. นะคะขอเรียนเชิญนะคะท่านผู้บริหาร PDPC นะคะทางด้านล่างนะคะสำหรับท่านรัฐมนตรีนะคะท่านผู้บริหารเรียนเชิญอยู่บนเวทีต่อนะคะจะขออนุญาตเรียนเชิญช็อตถัดไปค่ะ Ladies and gentlemen, next may I invite our speakers on the stage to join the memorable photos together.First, may I invite คุณปริญญาหอมอเนกค่ะ Next, may I invite Mr. U Sa Javiet, please. Thank you very much for joining us today. Next, may I invite our moderator today, Assistant Professor Dr. ผู้ช่วยศาสตราจารย์พีรพัฒน์โชคสุวัฒนสกุลค่ะ Thank you very much for joining us. Next, may I invite Assistant Professor Dr. ประพันธ์พงษ์ขำอ่อนค่ะPlease join us on the stage, please. Last but not least, may I invite Miss Wai San Wong up on the stage, please. ทุกท่านคะขอเสียงปรบมือให้กับสปีกเกอร์ของเราด้วยนะคะ Thank you very much for joining us. And here is the faces of our speaker that we have invited in order to share with you the fruitful and insightful information only for all of you here who attend in the International Conference 20 and 24 of PDPA. Under the theme of take control of your data, today we have divided into 2 sessions and we're going to experience everything today. Thank you very much. And may I invite all speakers to have a seat and relax downstairs, please. ขอเรียนเชิญนะคะสปีกเกอร์นะคะเรียนเชิญท่านด้านล่างนิดนึงนะคะท่านรัฐมนตรียังอยู่ต่อนะคะลำดับถัดไปนะคะขออนุญาตเรียนเชิญค่ะคณะทำงานรัฐมนตรีกระทรวงดิจิทัลเพื่อเศรษฐกิจและสังคมนะคะขึ้นถ่ายรูปพร้อมกันนะคะกับท่านรัฐมนตรีและท่านผู้บริหารค่ะเรียนเชิญค่ะวันนี้นะคะเราก็ได้รับเกียรติจากหลากหลายท่านนะคะทั้งฝั่งของภาคส่วนนะคะรัฐบาลเองนะคะแล้วก็ทางผู้ที่สนใจนะคะให้เกียรติมาร่วมงานกับเราเพราะว่าเห็นความสำคัญของข้อมูลนั่นเองนะคะว่าความเป็นส่วนตัวนะคะและการปกป้องข้อมูลเป็นสิ่งที่สำคัญที่สุดในยุคปัจจุบันที่ AI เข้ามาเป็นอิทธิพลหลักนะคะในการดำรงชีวิตในแต่ละวันนั่นเองค่ะ และนี่คือชมหน้านะคะของคณะทำงานนะคะแล้วก็ท่านรัฐมนตรีนะคะแล้วก็ทางส่วนต่างๆนะคะที่มีส่วนช่วยผลักดันให้ทาง PDPA นะคะได้รวบรวมคนที่เก่งมากๆเข้ามาพูดเป็นสปีกเกอร์วันนี้แล้วก็ข้อมูลต่างๆนะคะที่รับรองว่าเข้มข้นมากๆเลยสำหรับทุกๆคนที่สนใจในเรื่องของ Data Privacy นั่นเองค่ะยังมีอีกหลายกล้องนะคะขออนุญาตนิดนึงนะคะวันนี้สื่อมวลชนให้เกียรติมาร่วมงานกับทาง PDPC และ PDPA เยอะมากๆเลยนะคะขอบคุณมากค่ะขอเสียงปรบมือนะคะให้กับท่านรัฐมนตรีนะคะท่านคณะทำงานด้วยนะคะ Thank you so much for all the minister and also our executives our working team working party ขอบคุณมากๆค่ะเรียนเชิญนะคะเรียนเชิญนะคะแขกผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านคะอย่างที่ดิฉันได้เกริ่นไปนะคะตอนช่วงต้นนะคะว่าวันนี้เราจะแบ่งด้วยกันเป็น2หัวข้อนะคะ so as we mentioned earlier that today we have divided our session into 2 sessions right but before we start the first session we're going to have a short break to relax a bit before we start the useful information together. So for members of media who would like to have an interview with other minister and our executives, please feel free to do so. We have provided the area in front of the backdrop at the foyer for you. And we would like to have all attendees to get back here to resume for our seminar at 9:40 a.m. 9:40 a.m. So it's just a bit here around 5 to 10 minutes. So please enjoy your coffee break and see you again very soon. Thank you. all of you back here to our PDPA International Conference 20 and 24. We are now going to kickstart our first session in the topic of ASEAN, MCCs, and the implementation. And today we are honored to have our moderator who is a legal expert on PDPA. He currently teaches law at the Faculty of Law, Chulalongkorn University, with a focus on AI law. Very interesting, right? He is also a co-writer of a book, Thailand, Data Protection Guideline 2.0 and 3.0. He is a committee in the supervisory board of PDPC Thailand and also an advisor on PDPA law for many public and private agencies. So if you are now ready, may I pass the stage to our moderator, Assistant Professor Dr. Pirapat Chok Suwathana Sakul ค่ะขอเสียงปรบมือด้วยนะคะ
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's truly my pleasure and my honor to be here today as the moderator for actually both sessions, but for this morning session in particular to begin with. I think my task at the moment is I would like to give you a brief sort of introduction to what we're going to discuss in roughly 2 hours to come. Well, we're talking about ASEAN model contractual clauses, which I would expect that majority of you might have heard of it. It's pretty much because one of the very important aspects of personal data protection law is that when you transfer the data cross-border, it is very important that you have to be a bit more vigilant because you might transfer the data to the jurisdictions in which the protection of the personal data is not at the level of your jurisdiction. So that's pretty much the whole purpose that when you transfer cross-border, there must be some kind of measures in place in order to ensure that the data is still safe, especially in terms of the privacy is still being protected. So that's pretty much the big picture. And now if we zoom in the ASEAN region, I mean, we know that this is the region that, if you look at ASEAN as a country, you are looking at an economy of the size of 3.67 trillion US dollar. And if it is a country, it would rank 5th in the world as the largest economy, pretty much the same size as Germany. And it would outperform the UK. So this is one of the biggest regions and fastest growing. And if you look even deeper into the nature of the industry that it has, one of the very, very prominent industries that it has is tech. We have so many digital platforms that have become unicorn. And that is because we have a lot of people who will serve as a consumer base as well. We have more than 600 million people here in this region. And that is why this region is really promising in terms of the data that can be used in order to drive the economy itself. But at the same time, we here in the personal data protection, I think in this front, we really need to be careful as well. We need to be making sure that our protection, our understanding is up to the level that we can keep up with the speed of the development and the utilization of the data. So why? And that is why ASEAN countries, as a group, they have joined hand together. I think the beginning was in 2016 in order to draw the framework, to work together to ensure the standard is at the same level and people are interacting, especially in terms of data, in the level playing field. And one of the first operationalization of the framework is this thing, the model contractual clauses, which will lay the sort of foundation. Okay, and it has 2 modules, which we're gonna hear much deeper in details from our experts who will join us as the panelists in this panel discussion. But there are 2 modules within it. The first one is the contractual clauses that you can use as a standard for the data controller and the data processor, and another module which will stand as the template for you to use between data controller and data controller. Within it, you're going to see the standard elements of these contractual clauses, which is actually one of the instruments that can be used under the PDPA as well. If I will lead you to section 28 and 29, if you will have a look. It's the basis, the first thing, right, the basis. And the second thing is pretty much the baseline principles of the personal data protection. And the last thing is the data breach notifications. So that's pretty much what it is, and it would align these data controllers and data processors who are main entities under the personal data protection law. It would align their agreements to make sure that the data transfer cross-border within this region is up to the standard and people are competing on the same level playing field. And this is actually not just the ASEAN standard, it's a global standard. It is transferable anywhere in the world. So without further ado, I think I just provide a very brief context, very interesting. Please allow me to invite our speakers onto the stage, and we will begin our discussion today. So first and foremost, Assistant Professor Dr. Prapanpong Khamon. Dr. Prapanpong Khamon is a Dean of School of Law, University of Thai Chamber of Commerce, Thailand. He's also an expert committee in the Personal Data Protection Committee of Thailand, or PDPC. The second, Ms. Wai San Wong. She's a senior manager in policy of APAC from the BSA, the Software Alliance. Wong Wai San is senior manager at the BSA, the Software Alliance. She works with BSA members in the APAC region to develop policies and strategies on the range of data governance issues, including privacy and AI. And last but not least, please welcome Mr. Francis Chang, the Deputy Director Policy and Technology from the PDPC Singapore. Francis is Deputy Director Policy at the Personal Data Protection Commission, and is also a member of the Singapore Legal Service. So I think Francis is joining us online. Hi, Francis.
Okay. Hey, nice to meet you. Thank you for inviting. Good morning to all.
All right. So without further ado, I think I just briefly introduce all of you because I know I can't do justice to completely and comprehensively introduce you better than yourself. So please allow us to get to know you a bit better, especially in terms of experience or the area of expertise or research or interest that you have been working on. May I start from you, Dr. Prapanpong, please.
Right. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. On the basis of my introduction, I think I'm going to start with, I'm wearing two hats at the moment. So the first hat would be my main responsible to be here, which is the expert committee of the PDPC. And my second hat is the academic role, which I'm a Dean of School of Law, University of Thai Chamber of Commerce. But let me talk a little bit about the role as the expert committee of the PDPC. So the expert committee, the main role is to consider and investigate complaints lodged by a data subject. And if the committee found that the organization in question is in non-compliant with the law, then the expert committee can issue the enforcement orders or issue of fines depending on the severity of the breach. So that would be the first role as the expert committee. And also my second role as the Dean of School of Law, of course, academia, but my past experiences has been with the data protection all along. And then I published a number of articles and research papers on the cross-border data, especially with the ASEAN cross-border data regulation, which is actually within the topic that we are going to focus on today. So that's just a brief introduction on my side.
Thank you very much. Wazan, please.
Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Thank you to moderator and the host for inviting me. My name is Waisan, and I'm from BSA, the Software Alliance. I am based in Singapore, and I cover up policy for the APAC region. I focus on AI and privacy. I also look out over the ASEAN markets, and Thailand is one of my main markets alongside Indonesia, Vietnam, and Singapore. Previously, before I joined BSA, I was in the Singapore government for quite a number of years, and my last posting was at the PDPC, where I crossed paths with Francis for a very short while, and at the PDPC I did some policy issues like cross-border data transfers among one of them. Maybe I'll just give a quick overview of BSA and what we are. BSA, the Software Alliance, is an industry association. We represent the enterprise software industry, and we advocate for tech policy that promotes innovation and the digital economy. Our strength is our international perspective because we have offices all over the world. Our headquarters is in the US, in Washington, D.C. We've got our regional office in the APAC in Singapore, as well as another regional office in Brussels for the EU and other country offices around the world. And what we offer is our international perspective on policy issues, on issues such as privacy, data transfers, cybersecurity, AI. And our members are some of the most well-known companies in the world. Some of them are here today. And they offer services that power other businesses. So examples of the cutting-edge innovation that they provide include things like HR management services, data storage services, collaboration systems, and many, many more. And you can see from the slide here, these are the logos of our members. And thank you very much for having me today. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Francis, please.
All right, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this conference, and I apologize that I'm not there in person, because Singapore is also having our data protection conference next week, and the whole of my team is quite busy this week. For most of my career, I've been a government lawyer, and one of the big areas that I dealt with was data protection, so advising government agencies on data protection issues. But in my current capacity at Personal Data Protection Commission of Singapore, I look at policy issues. So my team and we look at data policies, and for example, we come up with advisory guidelines on specific sectors in the economy or specific subject areas. And we also issue clarifications on interpretation of our Personal Data Protection Act, PDPA. We also look at cross-border data flows issues. So for example, monitoring developments across jurisdictions around the world, engaging with our counterparts in other jurisdictions, for example, Thailand PDPC, and also coming up with policies for businesses in Singapore on how to transfer data out of Singapore. And yes, that's the brief introduction of what I and my team do. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. All right, so just a little bit of an overview, so we're going to discuss in depth the MCC, there's more contractual clauses, and we have audience today from both government and private sectors. I think they are keen to really learn the benefit and different aspects of this MCC and how it is going to be used within this ASEAN region in particular. So without further ado, that's going to take roughly 1 hour and 20 minutes, and then we would give an opportunity to the floor to ask the questions. If you have any questions for the speakers, we're going to spare roughly 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the session for that. Okay? All right, so without further ado, I think the first question that people would ask is like, okay, I sort of know what MCC is. And if I'm the businesses, what's in it, right? what really the key benefits that I should actually consider this MCCs, and what is the why do I need to use it? Can I start from you, Dr. Papanpong?
Yes, of course. Before we delve into the deep details of the MCCs, which is quite a lot, but I would suppose in the future we might have to get more time slot for the explanation of the MCCs. But first, let me tackle on the benefits of the MCCs on two issues. So first, you know that MCC, we are aware that it's one of the tools for a country like Thailand to transfer data to other ASEAN members in a freely manner with the data privacy protected. But also, I think the big question is that why do we need MCCs in the first place? So I would like to address the benefits of the MCCs by talking about why is cross-border data flow is so important to our economy, and then what benefits are we going to be gaining from having the MCCs, right? So if you look at the volume of the data worldwide that is transferred, consumed, and captured and copied, from 2010 to 2025, that's the estimation. You see that the data consumed and transfer is increasing by at least 5-fold every 5 years. So we start off by consuming 2 zettabytes in 2010 to 79 zettabytes in 2021. And we estimate that in 2025, the data will be transferred and consumed by 181 zettabytes. So that just lets you know how important it is for businesses to grow by using the data, and especially for Thailand, when we have the digitalized agenda for our nation to become like a digital 4.0 Thailand envision. So I think in becoming a data-driven economy, Thailand needs this data to have to be consumed and also to be transferring to another country as well to get more of the innovations to actually achieve our envisaged data-driven economy. So looking beyond Thailand, we are actually a member of the ASEAN, and one of the key factors for the ASEAN economy to grow is data. So data is key to every ASEAN growing SMEs, and you might not be surprised to know that 96% of the ASEAN businesses are actually small and medium enterprises. And with the data that can be transferred across the board, that can help the businesses of the ASEAN to grow with the data that can enhance their digital integration, transformation, that will add to $1 trillion in GDP by 2030. And SMEs, of course, can benefit from the data that can be transferred freely across the board to actually enhance their innovations that could enhance their business by saving the cost of almost $340 billion. Right, so that just let you know how important it is, not for Thailand as well to have a free flow of data, but for the ASEAN economy as well. Now, if you look at the benefits of having the free flow of data, you can see that the benefits, one of the top 5, if you can think of the benefits off the top of your head, the first one would be to improve the productivity. The second one would be to make a faster decision by having the data that is available in your business desk. That data might coming from other countries, and that is very helpful for your business to actually make a faster decision. And it also leads to a better financial performance as well when the data is actually getting in the desk very quick, and then we have the chance to actually expand our knowledge by getting the data that can be transferred to us from other jurisdictions. And also with the new product creation as well. So that might be top 4 benefits of having the data transfer freely across the board. Now, we are going a little bit closer to what we are going to talk about the benefits of the MCCs. So MCC is just one tool out of many among various regulations on the cross-border data transfer. But let me first talk to you about why is it important to have a regulation on cross-border data transfer. Now, the best scenario about innovation that everyone can think of is that we can have a free flow of data. Because when we have a data from other advanced economies, so that can enhance our innovation. But also bear in mind that in every data transfer to Thailand, or when Thailand wants to transfer data to another jurisdiction, there's always personal data in them, right? So then this is quite crucial when we talk about data transfer, because when we transfer the data to another jurisdiction, there's also personal data that's transferred. And then the main regulation is here to make sure that the personal data that's transferred to another jurisdictions, it might be transferring to the jurisdictions that do not have personal data protection law at all, or there might be jurisdictions that are lacking very much in the protection measures to the data privacy. So that would be very important for the regulators in the original country to make sure that all the data transferred to another jurisdictions is fitted with some form of like a safeguards for data privacy. And that's one of the area where the ASEAN MCCs fit in as a tool. But then moving away from the MCC a little bit, because I want to talk about the big picture of how the global landscape on the regulations on the cross-border data transfer is, right? So we have, I would suppose, 4 layers of regulations globally. The first one, we have international rules. So this is a long-established rules that actually look at how are we going to regulate the data that's transferred. How can we make sure that the data is transferred to another jurisdiction is within the safeguards of data privacy. And that's where we have the OECD guidelines on the cross-border privacy and the APEC privacy principles. And then moving on to the second layer, that's where I think particularly Thailand has just launched the regulations on the cross-border data transfer. And that's where the second layer comes in. We talk about regional regulation or country-specific regulation like the Thai PDPA. So at the regional level, we have the ASEAN principles, or with the ASEAN Personal Data Protection Framework. And that's actually the originator of the mother framework of the ASEAN MCC that we are going to be talking about. And then we have the GDPR, and that's taking a tour of the members of the EU, where they have a very strict regulations on the data privacy. And then we have, for example, the Thailand's PDPA, to talk about the regulations, how can we make sure that the personal data that is transferred out of Thailand to wherever they are, in those jurisdictions, can be transferred out of Thailand and have the protection safeguards to data privacy of the data subjects, right? So that's the main principles of the Thai regulation. We talk about examples, the adequacy requirements to actually check whether the destination countries have the adequate personal data protection measures before making a transfer. That will be one of the examples of the Thailand's regulation in terms of the cross-border data transfer. Then we move on to the third layer. We talk about tools now. And that's also fitted within our Thai PDPA perspectives as well, where we talk about the cross-border transfer tools. So these tools, in the globally speaking, there can be more tools, but I think the widely accepted tools are these 3, right? First one, we talk about contracts, right? So contracts can be tools to make sure that at the other end, the data privacy can be protected. And that's where we talk about the MCCs, like from the ASEAN. And we also have another word as well. That's the different contractual clauses, but when we call that SCCs, standard contractual clauses. So I assume most of you know the differences, but for those of you who doesn't know the difference between the SCCs and the MCCs, the SCCs are standard contractual clauses. So for example, if you have a company and you want to actually export data to another company, if your regulator prescribe the SCCs, so that's the standard contracts that you just place it in there and then make it binding. you don't need to actually amend anything because it's a standard contractual clauses, right? So that's the SCCs. And for the MCCs, like the ASEAN one, that's the model contractual clauses. So some of the new clauses, when you do business dealings, you can actually add those clauses into the MCCs, but those new clauses must not nullify or compromise the purpose of the whole MCCs. But also with the MCCs, there might be numerous clauses. Some of the clauses allow adaptation. Some of the clauses allow for adjustment, right? So the business can actually pick and choose the terms that are very perfect or appropriate for their business. But of course, some of the terms in the MCCs are mandatory. You cannot actually amend those terms because those are the fixed terms that are for the purpose of making sure that the protection is there, right? So that is the main differences between the SCCs and the MCCs. And the good news is that Thailand's regulation, our newly launched regulations on the cross-border data transfer, have both of these for the business to actually choose. The next one is the BCR, so it's the binding corporate rules for the corporates that are operating as the group companies. You might be operating a headquarter in Asia, you might be operating a hotel with a headquarter in Thailand, and you have your sister hotel in Vietnam, in Singapore, in Brunei. So you can use the BCRs to actually make sure that every business sectors that you have in those different jurisdictions are under one umbrella. So that's when you have the whole protection by having the BCRs in place. And the last one is the CBPR, or cross-border privacy rules. Originally, that's from the APEC, but now with the CBPR, it's a certification model. So if your business gets certified under the CBPR, you can actually transfer data freely to another company that gets certification from the CBPR as well. And one of the obstacles that the APEC CBPR faces over the years is that the CBPR system is only confined within the APEC members, right? But that's a shame opportunity because the data is actually pervasive and it moves beyond the APEC economies. So now there's the initiative to actually move further to expand more of the CBPR to cover non-APEC countries as well. So that's where we have now the global CBPR. And Thailand is considering this system. We actually are conducting a research to see the benefits, whether we should join in. So if you can join, then the businesses might get a leverage in the certification, because business, if they get certification, they can actually send data across the board to other companies in other CBPR certified jurisdictions to make sure that these benefits happen. And there are other tools as well, such as the privacy enhancing technologies or other domestic certifications. So there are these 4 layers of the global regulations on the cross-border data transfer. I think I will move on a little bit to talk about MCCs, but then before we talk about the ASEAN, we should see the example where those mature economies have done with what tools that they pick by business the most to be the tools for data transfer. And I think it might, if you ask business, this might not be a surprising factor for you, because you can see that 95% of the businesses in the EU use the SCCs to be a tool for transfer. And you might not be surprised why, because it's easy, right? If you have hospital in the EU, and then those hospitals has the deal contracts with Thai hospital in Thailand, so the EU hospital will place the SCCs for the Thai hospital to sign, and that is the easiest one. So, and that makes sure as well that the data that transfer from the EU to Thailand is fitted with the data privacy protection by way of the contracts that made mandatory for the both parties to sign. So that's quite easy. So you see a lot of adoption. Where you see other tools such as consent or the BCRs, they might not get that popular because it might have a lot of requirements to use. For example, the BCRs, you have to get your BCR to be authorized by your home country regulator before using it. And from the experience of the EU, in getting that authorization from the regulator can take up from 2 to 3 years. So that's quite a long time, right? Now, with the MCCs, so you see the MCCs now is one of the tools for cross-border data transfer because there are contracts, and that's the most important one, right? There are contracts. So I will actually unfold the 4 benefits of the MCCs, right? So the MCCs are contracts, the model contractual clauses adopted by the ASEAN, and Thai regulation actually recognize MCCs as a valid tool for transfer in our regulation, right? So business from Thailand can actually go ahead and use MCCs to be a tool for transfer. And since it's the contract, so you can place this contract between your business partner that might be in Singapore. We use this contract, and we can actually make some adjustment where the MCCs allow for our business actually transactions and where it's appropriate for our business. So for that said, the MCCs have 4 benefits. The first one is voluntary, right? So it's not mandatory. It's voluntary for the business to take up business from ASEAN because you have to be actually careful with this. Why it's voluntary? Because some of our ASEAN member states, some of them have not adopted any privacy law yet. So if we make it mandatory, it will be troublesome for some of the ASEAN states. So the first one is voluntary. And I think the good feature about the voluntary features is that it works across the ASEAN member states, whether those ASEAN member states have the data privacy regulator or not, whether that ASEAN member states have the privacy law or not, because it's contracts. It actually can be enforceable by law, right? So that's the first benefit. And the second benefit is that unlike the SCCs, the MCCs are flexible. There are some mandatory clauses that are very important for protecting data privacy, but there are flexible clauses as well where you can adjust the clauses to make sure that it's fitted within your legal requirements with your jurisdictions, or it's flexible, fitted within your business transactions for your business purposes. So that's provided flexible templates and it's ready to use, right? So I would like to invite all of you later after this to go to the ASEAN websites. You can actually type in the ASEAN MCCs and then you'll see the whole explanation and the templates for you to see. And you can see that it's really easy to use. The third one would be to reduce the lengthy contract negotiation process, because when you have the model that is templates ready for you, and which clause can be cut out, it also explains. Which clauses cannot be cut out, it also explains as well. So that reduces the hurdles and the time-consuming lengthy negotiation. And the last one is the benefit that ASEAN is thinking as well, to take these MCCs beyond the ASEAN implementation or the ASEAN benefits. It's true that for the ASEAN states, we can have benefits from these MCCs. But also when we talk about interacting with other jurisdictions outside ASEAN, they have their own MCCs, or some time they have their own SCCs. So that will be the job of ASEAN, and this come out in the paper of the ASEAN EU standard contractual clauses joint guide, to actually guide the businesses what are the differences in terms and common terms or different terms in between the ASEAN MCCs and other contractual clauses like the SCC from the EU, by putting these two side by side to see the differences. So when you negotiate with the EU counterparts, right, you can actually explain to the EU lawyers that, okay, these are the terms that are very similar and these are the differences. So can we use this to be the agreement so that the data can be transferred from the ASEAN member states to the EU, right? So I would just like to leave for the first round of discussion at this stage, and then we'll look forward to next, more discussions later.
Right. Thank you very much. That was really insightful. Wei-san, do you have anything to add on the question?
Sure, thanks for that. I probably want to add on a little bit on the various transfer mechanisms, but before we do that, maybe we just want to have a look at why did we need the ASEAN MCCs in the first place. So I think if we go back to the beginning, we see that as Dr. Prapanpong has mentioned, that there is a range in the ASEAN region, that it's a patchwork of different data protection regimes. So you have several countries like Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore that have had well-established PDP laws for a long time, more than 10 years. You also have Thailand. Congratulations for having your PDP law in place already, and the regulations are already and out. You also have other countries like Indonesia that just had their PDP law out, and their regulations are coming out as well. And then other countries are in the midst of developing their PDP laws like Vietnam, Cambodia, and you also have other countries that do not have any data protection laws yet, and we don't know when those will come out. So because there's this big patchwork and big range of data protection regimes, there needs to be some way within ASEAN, and that's why the ASEAN MCCs was one of those to help to bridge all these gaps in the region. So we had to make sure that when you're transferring data from one ASEAN member state to another, the level of data protection has to be in a similar standard. So I just wanted to go over some of the transfer mechanisms or tools from the viewpoint of a company trying to transfer. So earlier on we talked about adequacy. That's something that that came out from the EU, concept that came out from the EU. It tends to be, it's a government-to-government kind of arrangement where you need to have one country recognize the other. So in the context of EU adequacy, the EU needs to recognize individual companies. And it takes a long time. What we had at the beginning when the GDPR first came about was to have 11 countries on their adequacy list that was carried over from their former directive. And since then, only 2 new countries have been recognized as adequate. That's Japan and Korea. And that takes a long time. It takes many years. It's also unilateral. So it means that if the EU recognizes, it's only one way. You can't, there isn't an adequacy backwards. So it doesn't mean that the country that recognizes will also be able to accept the data. So for example, if let's say Singapore or Thailand recognizes EU as adequate, it doesn't mean that the EU, having not done that, the data can transfer freely. So adequacy is something that companies should not wait for, because you need to do business now, not in years to come. So, and the other thing is that adequacy also, there are exceptions. It's not a blanket allowance. So companies also need to be sure that any data transfers that take place under adequacy would be covered as well. So that's for adequacy. Then the next one was on BCR, binding corporate rules. That's also an EU concept, and that is for intra-group transfers. So that doesn't work if you are trying to transfer across companies, in intercompany transfers. And also, again, it's a long process. It takes 2 to 3 years at least for the company to work alongside with the authorities to make sure that their processes are in place. The other one that I want to just touch upon is certifications. Certifications is something that is good to have. and it is a way for many companies to show that they're going above and beyond contracts. Again, it's also something where you need the certifications to be recognized in the jurisdictions, whether it's in the origin jurisdiction or the transfer jurisdiction. It needs to be recognized on both sides again. So that's where certifications also have their limitations. So that leaves us with contracts. So contracts, when we look at ASEAN MCC, we find that that is very helpful because it's voluntary, it's flexible, and companies can just take it up in almost a plug-and-play model where there are all these blanks to fill in. Of course, you still have to do your homework. You can't just take it and not look at it. You also have to fill in some blanks because there are certain areas between the jurisdictions. So between the ASEAN member states, you may have to fill in extras because certain countries within ASEAN will have certain extra conditions. You have to make sure that you fill in those blanks to meet them. But at the same time, this reduces risk because you can just follow the template. It reduces the ambiguity so the companies will know exactly where they need to fill in, where they need to find out what exactly they need to do. So this is great for SMEs especially because a lot of times SMEs just need need that template to give them the guide to show them what exactly they need to do. So I think for companies wishing to transfer data within ASEAN especially, please make use of them. Look at your country of origin, so whether it's Thailand, Singapore, any other jurisdiction, and try to see whether there are any guides. So I know I'm plugging on behalf of Francis that there are some guides for the ASEAN MCC for Singapore context. So I don't know whether Dr. Prapampong will be doing some for the Thai context, so I think it would be very useful if these guides come out as well. And I think I'll stop here.
Well, that's so interesting. I think one keyword that sort of came to me when you two talk about this thing is harmonization. And I think it's quite clear, at least to me, now that there's so many benefits, one of which is it's fast, it's convenient, and it's private based, and you don't have to rely on this kind of a grand national agreement, which is not reciprocal anyway. So that's very interesting. When you see the benefits, I think probably the natural follow-up question would be, I do have my legacy system in place. I do have existing contract and this kind of like data transfer agreements that I've been doing all along. And now I see that MCC is there and I really want to integrate it into my sort of system backend. What would you say? What would you recommend they should go about and do this? Yes, please.
Okay, I think I'll go first on this, how to integrate the MCCs into your existing legacy contracts, because I think this is normal for the business when we talk about our company have also with the templates for the data to be transferred to the companies in other jurisdictions. But if we have the MCCs, how can we incorporate the existing ones into the ASEAN MCCs? So I'm just going to show a few slides, but then I'm just going to skip this slides first, because I think this slide will be, I think is quite important when we talk about fitting the MCCs into your existing contract. So I just want to point out the first three things first, and then we'll talk more deeply into that. The first one is that it's very flexible instrument, so you can actually add more clauses that is quite from your legacy or that's fitted within your business purpose, as long as those new clauses are not nullifying or compromising the purposes of the MCCs, right? So that would be the first one. You can add more clauses as long as those clauses are not contrary with the purpose of the MCCs. And the second one, which is marked in red color, which is optional clauses. So if you see your legacy contracts have some clauses that are very beneficial, you might actually want to look at MCCs, and where they say optional clauses, you can actually cut that out, right? So optional means like you might not choose this. I'll give you examples. I mean, if you have a chance to look at the MCCs, you'll see one of the optional clauses is the duty for the data exporter to make sure that they have the accuracy principles on their personal data. Why this is the optional clauses? Because not all ASEAN member states have the accuracy principles in the PDPA, but Thailand does, right? So for Thailand, when we want to do the MCCs, this might not be the clause that we can leave out because it's our law, right? But for other countries, they may look, oh, we don't have to make a duty to make sure that the data is accurate. So they might want to leave this out. So that's the optional clause. And the third one that you see in the green there is the choose the relevant clauses, right? So this is the flexibility that the ASEAN MCCs offer because the ASEAN MCC is actually aware that not all legal requirements will be the same across all ASEAN member states. So they will mark the green one where the company in Thailand, for example, to look at our legal requirements and make sure that we put that in there. I'll just give one example of the green area. That will be the duty of the data processor to notify breaches to the data controller. And in Thailand, we say that you need to notify as soon as possible, but no later than 72 hours. So that's different across jurisdictions. Some other ASEAN jurisdictions might require less time than that or more time than that, but for our law it's no more than 72 hours. So that will be the green one where we can actually put in there to require the notification to the data exporter within 72 hours, right? So that's the three, I think, important kind of notions when we talk about how do we integrate the legacy contracts to the ASEAN MCCs. So I mentioned all those three, but then this is example that you might take a look at it later. You can see that in the MCCs. So this is one section of the MCCs where they talk about the obligations of the data importer, right? So the one that's marked red is optional, right? So if you don't have the detailed purposes, so you can leave out the clause of 3.1. Where you have the green one, you can see that's the clause where it asks about the time frame of notifying the data exporter, right? Because the jurisdictions have different time frames. So if we want to frame the time in accordance with the Thai law, so we can put in 72 hours for the data processors at the other end to inform, notify the data exporter, who is the data controller, actually within the time frame of 72 hours. So that will be, I think, the overview of what we can do with the MCC. So you can see that it's very flexible. It actually is a well-thought instrument of how they put what clauses can be optional and what clauses can be marked green, where the companies in different jurisdictions can actually have a look and see what sort of like legal requirements that their jurisdictions actually prescribe them to do, so you can actually adjust in the green. So I just put the summary in here of the useful points when you want to actually integrating your existing contracts to the MCCs. So like I mentioned before, that you can add clauses to the MCCs, the clauses that might be crucial to your business, but those clauses cannot contradict with the purpose of the MCCs. The second one, what I would like to say, you should specify key definitions. For example, definitions of the data subject, right? Because in Thailand, we don't actually cover the deceased person, but in some jurisdictions, the data subject actually covers the deceased person. So you might want to add the clause there of the definition, because it doesn't compromise the purpose of the MCC, because it just adds more to it for the protection that is very clear in the definition of the concerning jurisdiction. The third one would be setting the time frame for notifying the breaches. And that's where the ASEAN MCCs already provide a green section for you to specify different time frames. That's varying upon the legal requirements, like I mentioned before, in the case of Thai PDPA requirements. And the last one is you should allocate the responsibility for compensating the affected data subject. Because in the ASEAN MCCs, there are, I think Francis is going to explain more on this. There are two actually models. The first one is a template for data controller to data processor. And the second template is for data controller transfer to data controller, right? So when there is a breach, right, which party is responsible for compensating the data subject? So that will be the area that you have to be negotiating among your counterpart. So that will be the key 4 components of considering when you want to actually adapting the ASEAN MCCs to the existing contracts. So I'll just stop here and then we look at more response from the other speakers.
All right. Wei-san, you would like to add anything on that?
Sure, thank you. I think Dr. Prapanpong gave a really good roundup of advice. You should always listen to the law professor, so I hope you've been taking notes. I'd just like to add a little bit more. I think in the first place also, does your company need to use the ASEAN MCCs at all? So it is not necessarily to transform your contract to look exactly like the ASEAN MCC. What you could do is that it's meant to be a voluntary template, so you can use that as your guide to see whether all the right components are in place. So that's the great thing about it. We've been talking about flexibility and the voluntary nature of it. So the good thing about this ASEAN MCC is that you don't get locked in like standard contractual clauses where you're forced to use them exactly word for word. So you can adapt the clauses to your specific context and whatever needs that you have, as long as they continue to meet the needs, the principles of the ASEAN MCCs, they don't contradict each other. So your companies can continue to update the clauses, adapt to your changing business needs. So I think this will ensure that you have ongoing relevance, and that's very important.
Well, that's so interesting. So it seems like if you are about to sign a new one, maybe this is a really good place to start. But if you have tons and tons of existing contract, maybe this would serve as a sort of like checklist or the thing that you should actually use. Sort of compare with your existing documents. That's super interesting. By the way, Francis, do you have anything to add on that, or on the way that you're going to integrate this MCC into your legacy or in your existing documents?
Not at this moment.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so let's move on to, I think we found it quite obvious that it's, well, tons of benefits, and the way that you would integrate it into the existing system is quite convenient as well. The next one is probably, it seems like something that would lead to the end of it, because this is pretty much the means, right? And as Dr. Prapanpong mentioned earlier, huge potential there, right? A boost of $1 trillion US. That is 30% of the GDP of this whole region. That's huge. And that basically means that this could serve as a tool that would accommodate the data transfer cross-border, at least within this region of ASEAN. So the question is like, how exactly, how ASEAN MCC would contribute to the harmonization of data, protection across this ASEAN member states. Really want to hear your take on that. So who would like to go first?
Yeah. I'll just go first on this very quickly, yes, because I think it will be this is good for the discussion base, right, topic about harmonization. So I think I need to actually take a broad picture first of the ASEAN data protection regulation in general. So we have the ASEAN protection framework, which is the ASEAN data protection framework, which was launched in 2016. But that framework is voluntary, right? So each member states, when they launch the law, for example, Thailand, we look at those principles prescribed by the ASEAN Data Protection Framework to actually launch our law aligning in those principles, right? For the basis that is voluntary, that means that each member states can actually come up with their own principles or make sure that their principles are actually fitted within the framework of other international frameworks, right? So looking from the outset, when there is no commander to tell you what to do, because the ASEAN framework is voluntary, the potential effect would be no harmonization, right? Because there's no like a strict teacher telling you what to do. So each member state can have like a straying effect, like, oh, I want to be a bad student, not following the ASEAN framework, right? So harmonization is something that's a bit tricky when we talk about the ASEAN being a voluntary framework, right? But however, there are ways into it, because we always talk about the ASEAN way. But I think that works in many aspects as well, where some other regions cannot do what we do, but also we do something that's very excellent that cannot be done with, by other regions as well. So within the ASEAN way, how can harmonization happen? When we talk about the ASEAN MCCs specifically, the process into getting the MCCs to be the place where it is now is not like a one-day process. It comes from the process of the meetings within the ASEAN member states, and we make sure that what could be the tool that would be fitted within the ASEAN way of being voluntary. Right? So we talk about harmonization in taking the ASEAN way into the aspects when we talk about the ASEAN MCCs, and we discuss it at the ASEAN member states level, senior officials level, where we talk about promotion of the MCCs. So first, the MCCs being flexible as it is, it has the benefits, right? Because it works across the board. Whether that ASEAN states have privacy laws or not, whether those ASEAN member states have data protection authorities or not, right? Those ASEAN jurisdictions where they don't have the data privacy laws yet they can still use the ASEAN MCCs, because in the end, these are contracts, right? Enforcement will happen if there's anything that is a data breach and a lot of data subjects have been affected, then you can actually seek recourse through the contracts by way of enforcing into courts or arbitration. So that's where you have a protection for the data subjects, because they get those protections from the method of enforcing via the traditional legal enforcement, which is courts or arbitration, right? So that's the contracts, and it's flexible, and the harmonization effect that it creates, so that it can actually be taken up by the ASEAN member states the way they see fit, like from the flexible aspects into it. I think the harmonization will happen more with the promotion, right? So in Thailand, for example, this is I would say this is a kick-off day actually for making for becoming known about the ASEAN MCC. The next step would be to actually look at it in a more detail and how the business can actually benefit from it, right? So promotion would be the second aspect of the harmonization, right? So I'll just take the aspects of harmonization by looking at the way the ASEAN is structured, which is voluntary in terms of the MCCs at least. And then I'll talk the aspects about harmonization. I just talk about that with the promotion aspect within the ASEAN member states level.
That's very nice. I think one of the spearheads of the MCC and pretty much the framework initiatives was the PDPC Singapore. And really want to hear from Francis, what is it like that ASEAN MCC would contribute to the harmonization of the data protection standards within this region?
All right, thank you. But before I talk about harmonizing across ASEAN member states, maybe I will share a bit about Singapore's data protection regime and how we look at cross-border data flows. I think my slides are there. Right. Okay, so can I go to the next slide, please? The next slide. Thank you. All right. So this is an overview of Singapore's Personal Data Protection Act. We enacted this in 2012, and we set up the Personal Data Protection Commission 1 year later in 2013. Then from 2014, exactly 10 years ago, the data protection provisions in our PDPA came into effect. So I want to point out one, I guess, a little bit unique point about Singapore's PDPA is that within the PDPA itself, we recognize that the purpose of the Act is to govern collection, use, and disclosure of personal data in a manner that recognizes both the right of individuals and the need of organizations. So there is implicit in this statement is that there is this balance between individuals' rights and organizations' need, because we recognize that organizations need to use data. So if your starting point is that data cannot be used, then that actually has a very serious impact on organizations' use and also the economy of the country. So this is something that we recognize upfront in the PDPA. Can I go to the next slide, please? Under our Singapore's PDPA, we have 10 data protection obligations. So these are the 10 obligations that you can see on the screen. I'll just briefly talk about each of them. So accountability basically is about demonstrating that you can comply with the PDPA. So for example, in Singapore, every organization has to appoint a data protection officer, and you have to come up with data protection policies and also make these policies available when your customers ask for them, for example. Number two, notification is about giving your customers or giving the individuals enough information that they can make a decision whether to give consent, which is related to number three. So consent under the PDPA means that you need to get consent from the individual before you collect, use, or disclose personal data. But we also provide situations where consent is not required. So for example, if there is a vital interest of the individual for emergencies, for example, when there's public interest or in certain commercial situations like fulfilling a contract, so contractual necessity. So in certain situations, and this is where the balance that I mentioned earlier, balancing the needs of organization and individuals come in. So in certain situations where there is a very strong need for the businesses to use the data, very obvious needs, those situations you don't need consent. And in a way, it sort of maps to jurisdictions, for example, under GDPR, where instead of a consent obligation, they talk about legal basis for processing personal data. So under GDPR, they have 6 legal bases. So consent is just one of the 6. In Singapore, we talk about consent obligations and exceptions to the consent. Okay, so that is for consent. Number 4 is purpose limitation. Basically, it means that after you have collected the personal data, you must use it only for the purpose that you have sought consent for, or where the exceptions apply. And the purpose also has to be reasonable. Number 5 is about accuracy. The company if you have personal data and you need to use it to make decisions that will affect the individuals, or if you need to disclose it to third parties, then you need to make sure that the personal data that you have is accurate. Number 6, I suppose is very important and probably the obligation that most people will focus on, which is you need to protect it. And protection is, I mean, in the name of the law itself in many countries. So in Singapore, what this means is that you have to make reasonable security arrangements to protect the data from data breaches, for example. Number 7 is on how long you can keep the personal data for. So retention limitation. Once you do not have a reason to keep the data, you have to either delete it or anonymize it, for example, so that it is no longer considered personal data. Number 8 is about transfer limitation, which I will explain a bit more in the next slide, but it's basically about what you need to do when you transfer personal data out of Singapore. Number 9 is access and correction. So personal data that you have and you have used, if let's say the individual asks for information about how you have, what kind of information you have about the individual, how you have used the information, you as the company have to provide this information to them. And last but not least, I would say very important obligation, when there is a data breach, the company, in the case of data controllers, have to notify PDPC. And of course, again, there's a balance here, and we recognize that it may not be, it probably is very inefficient for the company to notify every single data breach. So we have a certain threshold where the data breach is of significant scale, that means 500 people affecting 500 individuals or more, or if the data breach involves personal data that is a bit more sensitive, can cause harm, significant harm to the affected individuals, then we require the companies to notify PDPC. Okay, so this is an overview of all the obligations. Now I will explain a bit more about the transfer limitation obligation, which is the obligation that is most relevant to today's topic. So under our PDPA, I guess this is also similar to Thailand's PDPA. Before you transfer data out of Singapore, you must ensure that the data can be protected to a standard comparable to the PDPA. And again, we understand that for business dealings, for the economy to flow, data has to leave and enter Singapore. So we make it convenient for companies to comply with this transfer limitation obligation by clearly stating what they can do to comply with this obligation. So binding corporate rules, contractual clauses, and certifications. And after hearing from Dr. Prabhapong, I also noticed that this is quite similar to Thailand PDPA. The focus of one of the legal enforceable obligations is contractual clauses, which is the topic today. And here I will segue into the ASEAN initiatives. Can I go to the next slide, please? Oh, sorry. Let me before I talk about that, let me explain how in Singapore we recognize the ASEAN MCCs. So maybe I'll give a clarification here. How it works in our regulations, we don't specify ASEAN model contractual clauses in the PDPA regulations. What the PDPA regulations say is simply that you have to, one of the ways to comply with the transfer limitation obligation is to have contractual clauses between the sender and the overseas recipient. And these contractual clauses must impose obligations that are comparable to PDPA. So we don't specify what kind of templates you must use or what specific clauses you must put into the contract. But PDPC separately issued a joint guidance. When the ASEAN MCCs was endorsed at the ASEAN level, we came up with a document to clarify that if you use ASEAN MCCs, you are deemed to have complied with our transfer limitation obligation. And that is paragraph 2 of what you can see on the screen. We even go further to say that these ASEAN MCCs can also be used beyond ASEAN. So whichever country where the data protection regime is based on internationally recognized standards, for example, APEC Privacy Framework or OECD Privacy Guidelines, you can also use the ASEAN MCCs. So Singapore companies can use ASEAN MCCs to transfer personal data to anywhere across the world. It's not just within ASEAN. And we recognize that modifications can be done, because depending on the context of the business dealings, there might be additional clauses, or there might be some amendments to the clauses. And we point out, and this is paragraph 4, that it is voluntary in nature if companies already have their own contractual templates, which actually would probably be the case for a lot of MNCs. For big sophisticated companies, they already have their own ways to comply with similar obligations all around the world. So they probably have one way, a template that can allow them to be in compliance with multiple jurisdictions. So for those kind of MNCs, they don't have to stick with ASEAN MCCs or indicate that they are using ASEAN MCCs. So this is our way of clarifying that this is voluntary. Okay, can I go to the next slide, please? Yes, so now maybe I'll talk about some ASEAN frameworks and initiatives. The next slide. So an overview, I think Dr. Prapanpong had also mentioned most of these initiatives. Back in 2016, ASEAN as a whole already agreed on a set of principles, data protection principles, set out in something called the ASEAN Framework on Personal Data Protection. So this is, unlike GDPR, which is binding on all the European Union members, this ASEAN Framework is not binding on ASEAN member states. It is a set of agreed principles. And it doesn't mean that once we come up with this framework, all countries must come up with laws to align with the principles. So it is really something that we, at a principle level, we agreed on. 2 years later, we came up with something called the ASEAN Framework on Digital Data Governance. I would call this like a work plan of initiatives. So later there will be a slide on what this means, but one of the items in the work plan relates to cross-border data flows, and that is where we came up with the ASEAN MCCs. There is also another document called the ASEAN Data Management Framework, which I will also touch on a bit more later on. Can I go to the next slide, please? Yes, so this is the ASEAN Framework on Personal Data Protection. I've set out all the principles here, so you can take a look if you're interested, but I will zoom into number 5. So within the principles itself, we have the principle on cross-border data transfers. So at the principle level, ASEAN member states have agreed that, okay, organizations should seek consent for cross-border or ensure that the recipients will protect the personal data that in a way that is consistent with the principles. So if we have a consensus on these principles and the laws of the ASEAN member states are consistent with, aligned with such principles, then in theory, this framework on personal data protection, together with the ASEAN MCCs, will ensure that at least within ASEAN, there is a free flow of data. Okay, can I go to the next slide, please? Yes, this is the framework on digital data governance in 2018. And this is a very ambitious framework, I would say. And if I'm not wrong, it is annually being reviewed and it might be updated later on. But basically, there are 4 pillars under this digital data governance. As you can see, the cross-border data flows is just one of the 4 pillars. So if you look at the second one, we call it the ASEAN cross-border data flows mechanism. And actually, under this pillar, there are 2 items. So one is on contract and the other is certification. The contract item is the result of that is the ASEAN MCCs. And the certification one, I think ASEAN member states are looking at it and deciding how and when to implement that. The other 3 pillars are also important. The third and the fourth are basically forums. One for a bit of more technical digital innovation topics, and the last one is more like regulators coming together, discussing issues and best practices. The first pillar is, I will talk a bit more maybe later on, but it's from the first pillar, we came up with something called the ASEAN Data Management Framework, which I believe actually can go hand in hand with ASEAN MCCs. But for now, I'll stop here in my response to the moderator's question. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Wei-san, do you have anything to add, please?
Sure, thank you. So on harmonization, I think for the ASEAN MCCs, they came into place precisely for harmonization across ASEAN, intra-ASEAN harmonization. So as long as each of the ASEAN member states recognizes the ASEAN MCCs as a valid transfer mechanism, then it forms a common baseline, and that's where your harmonization comes in. So each data protection authority only needs to recognize the ASEAN MCC. They don't need to, for example, do an adequacy process. So among 10 ASEAN member states, you can imagine if they're going to do adequacy, each ASEAN member state doing an adequacy assessment for 9 other ones, and it's unilateral. They all have to draw lines between them and talk about it. It's going to take years. So I don't know about the maths, but it sounds like it's going to be really onerous. I think we should stick with the ASEAN MCCs. I think that's a great way to do it. So all the hard work has already been done at the ASEAN digital ministers level. It's all been endorsed already. So for any data protection authorities, all they need to do is to take that next step and endorse it. So I think for Singapore and Thailand, that's already been done. The hope is really for all the 10 ASEAN member states to do the same as well. So aside from that, we also talk about interoperability outside of the ASEAN. Okay, so we're looking at between ASEAN, the bloc, as well as other areas. So I think Francis also touched on that the ASEAN MCCs can be used for transfers outside of ASEAN. I'm also very glad that the EU-ASEAN joint guide has been touched upon as well. That's something that before I left the PDPC, I was working a little bit on that. So I'm very glad that this project, the Part 1 and Part 2 of the joint guide, has already been issued. So that's very encouraging because it means that the interoperability can go beyond ASEAN. So it can go between EU and ASEAN, and there's a way for the two of them to speak to each other. And companies like that, BSA companies really like that because many, if not most, all of our companies are global companies, and they value the interoperability, they value this kind of standardization, and this really enables them to harmonize their systems across their various operations across the world. It gives them certainty. It helps them with compliance because, as you know, MNCs need to fulfill a lot of rather complicated compliance activities. And as long as there's harmonization, we find that this makes things a lot easier for our companies.
Right. Well, it seems to be really promising, but I could imagine some difficulties as well, especially when you implement it. I could also imagine that, if you were, say, big corporates with all this sort of standard in place, and you have personnel to manage it, this kind of agreement maybe probably you don't need that much adjustment in terms of to adapt to the standard. And I can see that if you have to wait for this kind of government-to-government initiatives or for the agreement to be reached, that is very difficult as well. I used to work in the government at the Department of Trade Negotiations, and I know how long it takes for any two countries to reach an agreement. And especially in these very technical issues where, some countries don't even have this sort of modern personal data protection yet. So this is going to be interesting. And I also see this kind of constraints or challenges, if I may, that are lying ahead of us when we try to implement this MCCs within our region, which of course we have this sort of aim that eventually is going to be something that can be applied globally. So I would like to hear from you on this side of the story where the challenges are, and maybe we discuss later how we can actually tackle these challenges. Who want to come first? Is this you, Francis?
Yes, sure. So maybe I can continue with my slides that was done earlier. Yes. Okay. Okay, I see it on my screen. So going back to all these ASEAN initiatives that we have, I think the answers to the challenges can be found here. But maybe let me elaborate a bit more. Can I go to the next slide? Yes. So I would say maybe the first challenge I can identify is for businesses, particularly those in jurisdictions that do not have data protection regimes, and so they may not be familiar with data protection, or they may not be already have all these data processes and practices readily demonstratable in a way that consumers can understand, because they don't need that for compliance. So this is a very real challenge within ASEAN, because let's say Singapore, for example, when we say, okay, our businesses can transfer data to any ASEAN member state, even those that do not have data protection regimes. Legally speaking, once they use ASEAN MCCs, they can transfer the data out. But how do we give the assurance to consumers that their data can indeed be protected overseas? Because if you think about it, the ASEAN MCCs is basically saying that if something goes wrong, the law can come in and go after the overseas party responsible for whatever wrong has happened. But further upstream, how do we have the confidence that the overseas party is able to protect the data? So it is not beyond the legal obligations. How do we help companies across ASEAN know how to protect data? And this is where the ASEAN Data Management Framework comes in. So in summary, what this Data Management Framework, or DMF, is a guide. So it's a guidebook meant for businesses, in particular SMEs, because as I mentioned previously, actually big companies, MNCs, they are already very familiar because of the fact that they need to comply with a lot of regulatory requirements elsewhere in the world. They already have these processes in place. But for these SMEs, especially those in countries without data protection regimes, they may not know how to protect personal data. So this guidebook comes in to teach them how to understand the data lifecycle across 6 foundational components. So it covers the entire process, from the creation of personal data to disclosure, collection, storage, and all the way to disposal. So I wouldn't go into all this, that would take a session on its own. So if you Google ASEAN Data Management Framework, you can find the guidebook. I think one way is for ASEAN member states to promote awareness of this guide, because this is not a regulatory requirement. Even in Singapore, we don't tell our companies that you must use a DMF or you must make sure that your overseas partners comply with this. So you don't need to create laws for this. You just need to, for example, put it out on your website, or when you have a social media, you can refer to this, so that businesses have something to look at, and they can then be equipped with the necessary tools to comply with the legal obligations set out in the ASEAN MCCs. Can I go to the next slide, please? Yes, so just a summary of why the DMF is useful. So it talks about data collection, and if you can protect it enough, then the chances of something wrong happening is actually lower. So, ASEAN MCCs is to make sure that if something happens, you can go after the recipient. But of course, by default, we do not wish that to happen in the first place. So maybe I'll just go to the next slide to talk about the ASEAN MCCs. So as Dr. Prabhupon mentioned, there are 2 modules to the ASEAN MCCs. So again, this is just to explain that this is very flexible. It applies to different types of scenario. It could be the case of outsourcing. that would be a controller to processor transfer. So you just need to outsource a particular function of your companies to an overseas entity. It could be HR, payroll, it could be a contact center, which is very common, especially for SMEs. Smaller companies usually don't have all of these functions within the company, so they would need to do a lot of outsourcing. And ASEAN MCCs can come in to help. And then for controller to controller, this is about business dealing. So business to business, when you need to send data to your overseas partners, for them to make use of the data for their own purposes, that is when the controller to controller module comes in. I think the next slide is also, actually all of these have already been mentioned by Dr. Propampong. I will just reiterate. So it's flexible because once you have a guide, businesses don't need to start from scratch. Or rather, if let's say they already have their own templates, they don't have to argue over whose template should be the starting point, because the template that the government has endorsed could be the starting point. So it reduces negotiations and understanding, because through regulatory guidance, both sides can come to a common understanding of what those clauses mean. And anyone can use it, and it's easy ASEAN adoption. So this second and third point, actually, I will mention that because we are talking about challenges, I would say the second challenge, so first challenge is for businesses, right? How to make sure that businesses, especially small businesses, can know how to protect data. So that's beyond the ASEAN MCCs. The second challenge is about how can ASEAN member states adopt ASEAN MCCs. And this is, I would say it's because due to the diversity of ASEAN, because we are all at different levels of data protection maturity, and we have different considerations, national considerations and policies behind data. So in a way, the fact that our ASEAN framework on data protection is not binding, at first glance, it might be something that hinders adoption, because you could say that you look at EU, they have a GDPR that is binding. All the member states have to do it. You don't need to spend too much effort convincing each member state to do it. But actually, if we had started off in 2016 with this in mind, I don't think ASEAN member states would have agreed on anything. So the fact that we started with a set of principles that we could agree on actually is good, because we leave it to each ASEAN member state on how to adopt the framework on personal data protection, those principles. So for example, even in Singapore, our PDPA obligations, which I went through at the start of my deck, you would notice that the names, the labels that we put to those obligations are not exactly the same as the ASEAN framework on personal data protection, because it is not about copying whatever is there into your laws. It is about ensuring that whatever laws that you come up with, those obligations are consistent with these principles that we have agreed on at the ASEAN level. So I have the confidence to say that the PDPA principles are aligned with the personal data framework at the ASEAN level. And so if each country can consider these principles when coming out in their own regime, I think that would help towards harmonization. So we don't need laws to be the same. We just need the principles to have, we just need to have consensus on the principles themselves. So once we have that, then the way of adopting ASEAN MCCs is actually also flexible. So I mean, the ASEAN MCC itself is flexible for businesses, but the adoption by regulators is flexible. So even, so right now we have Philippines, Singapore and Thailand who have adopted ASEAN MCCs, but the way we have adopted, each of us actually are not exactly the same. So there is no prescribed way under ASEAN level on how ASEAN MCCs can be adopted. So again, this at first may seem like a challenge, but actually I think this helps ASEAN member states come to some sort of agreement on how we can implement ASEAN MCCs. Can I go to the next slide, please? Yes, so I would say this is, this drawing guide was mentioned by both Dr. Prabhupon and Ms. Waisan. I would say this is probably also possibly another challenge, and that is how do we convince both regulators and businesses that ASEAN MCCs is worth adopting? Because within ASEAN, we have economies, we have businesses going on across ASEAN, but a lot of data flows also take place between ASEAN member states and the rest of the world. So let's say if we need to, if we feel that if businesses think that, or maybe it's better to just go with SECs because my business dealings are mostly with them, then we can we can ignore ASEAN MCCs because that's non-binding, it's voluntary anyway. But this is where, at least for Singapore PDPC, we feel that it is important to take ASEAN MCCs beyond ASEAN. And the joint guide was something that we really wanted the European Commission to work with us on, because even though the joint guide is not an endorsement that ASEAN MCCs is the same as EU SECs, at least the authorities on both sides have recognized that both templates exist, have come together to explain what both templates mean and also how to comply with both templates. So that kind of regulatory guidance is important and tells businesses that actually ASEAN MCCs is not just meant for ASEAN, it is meant for the rest of the world, and other regions recognize it as well. So let's say if you are a business and you just started off looking at cross-border data flows and you don't know whether you would do business outside ASEAN, you can start with ASEAN MCCs without being afraid that later on when you need to move on beyond the region, you will have to go to an entirely different template. Because, for example, let's say you want to move from ASEAN to having EU partners, actually there is already a guide to show you how to understand the differences and also how to bridge the differences if necessary. So this is the last part of my deck, and I think these challenges, even though there are challenges, those can be addressed through our ASEAN initiatives. Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Any of you would like to jump in here to talk about challenges?
I think I'll add that for companies who are facing challenges with the ASEAN MCCs, you should talk to the regulator, you should tell them and let them know what the challenges are. I think for Thailand as well as Singapore, both PDPCs are very, very open to industry feedback, and they always are wanting to know how to improve the mechanisms they have in place. So I would encourage all of you, if you do face challenges, please let your regulator know.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? Conversation between regulator and regulated is always a good idea. We have talked about the benefits. We talk about how would we integrate into the system, and then we discuss this kind of what kind of challenges that we are facing. I think probably the very important, and might be my last question before I open the opportunity to the floor, is going forward. Well, what kind of, instruments, initiatives, or actions that we can do in order to make sure that, because I heard a lot, and that one of the main concerns is about enforcement, right? It's about enforcement, and once the dispute occurs, how would we resolve it, where, and under which condition, or is there any limitation on that front? So just would like to hear how we can ensure that the enforcement is going to be effective and the dispute is going to be resolved in the most effective manner. especially when we use this ASEAN MCC. I think probably we have to touch upon the cooperation between the member states as well. But of course, I would like to going even further into the private initiatives or any kind of programs that we can work together on that front. So, Wei-san, you want to touch upon it, please?
Sure, happy to. I think for the first point that I want to make up front is that for the ASEAN MCCs, it's up to the contracting parties to decide on how they want to address their enforcement and grievances. All right. Sorry about that. And it's up to the party to decide from themselves which, for example, which jurisdiction they're going to base their contracts in. Are they going to go straight to the civil courts? Are they going to use mediation? So I think, for one, that is already dependent on the individual contracting parties, and that is up to them in the ASEAN MCCs how they want to resolve that. But I think the bigger picture is really, is there any demand for some kind of enforcement, some kind of grievance redress overall to address these issues in ASEAN? So I think that really depends on the region, country to country, and whether there's the demand for that. So here is where I think it's very important to open up the channels of communication. So I can imagine that there are three kind of aspects to it. One of that is government versus the industry. So I use the wrong word versus, it sounds adversarial, but it's not. It should be government and industry coming together to talk. So I think forums like this, informal channels, formal channels for industry and the various governments, individual governments to talk, that's very helpful. I think I'm just calling for further discourse that every time there are new initiatives like the ASEAN MCCs, we could continue to have the discussions on how it's working, where it's working well, where it's not working well. So earlier on, I called for the companies using the ASEAN MCCs. If you have challenges, you should raise it with your regulators. So I think this is important, and for regulators, we also ask for the regulators to please continue this warm relationship with the industry. Don't wait for things to break down, and when you're you don't want to have that versus kind of idea. You don't want to be the police going after the bad guys. It's not always like that. A lot of times companies have their reasons why they were out of compliance because they didn't understand, or maybe the first one is they were not aware, then the second one is they didn't understand, then the third one is that they didn't even know how to do it. So there are all these areas where industry and the regulators can talk, and that would be very helpful. And I would say also to make sure that you talk with a wide range of constituents. So for example, for the ASEAN MCCs, don't just talk to, for example, BSA members who are the big companies. You also talk to the SMEs. You talk to all the full range of those who may or may not be using, because even though there are companies who are not using the MCCs, they may still be affected by the use of the MCCs because of downstream effects. So that's one thing. And then the other is also to continue consulting and to avoid doing that kind of checkbox approach where you just, for example, I just want to make sure that I hear from industry, I give them a chance, but actually there's just too short a window. So, but we also understand that governments have their constraints, they have their timelines to meet, but the important thing is to keep these channels open, to keep talking to each other. So I think that's one, and I find it very helpful that Singapore, Thailand, especially, it's very easy to talk to the regulators, and I especially want to acknowledge that Thailand, for example, has been very, very helpful, and considering that you're a non-English speaking country, to hold this conference in English for international benefit, I think that's really commendable. and I really do look forward to more of that. I want to move on to the next aspect, which is kind of intra-government kind of collaboration. So I think one aspect that the industry can sometimes find very frustrating is when different aspects of government, different agencies have different requirements, and they are not necessarily harmonized across there. So we would welcome that. So for example, if there are different reporting requirements, so if you have to report a data breach to multiple regulators, for example, the Personal Data Protection Authority, the Cybersecurity Authority, maybe even the sectoral ones, like if you're in the financial industry, that can create a lot of reporting compliance issues. It's okay if it's simply reporting, but sometimes you have to report different types of information, so that can be another challenge. And then sometimes there are even conflicting requirements. For example, data retention. Some industries may say that, oh, actually you have to keep the data for X years, but then maybe the personal data protection law says you must delete it as soon as possible. And then this can be really frustrating when there are so many different kinds of regulations and requirements within the government as well. And then that leads me to the last aspect, which is intergovernment. So within ASEAN, between the different governments, I think one thing that is really commendable is that the ASEAN MCCs is a result of the ASEAN process. So we welcome more of that. We welcome this discussion between the countries to harmonize as much as possible, to create this space for the digital economy to grow. We welcome things like the ASEAN Digital Economy Framework Agreement. This is also something that helps companies to grow. It helps ASEAN as a whole to expand and to do more, to do better. And finally, the last aspect of the G2G part is the block-to-block aspect. So that's the ASEAN-EU collaboration for the joint guide, for example. And we welcome more of that. I hope that this can be, maybe if not formalized agreement, it could be a more ongoing, permanent kind of process to discuss beyond SEC and MCC, how else to improve the data transfers between the blocks. So I think that's probably a snapshot of the various kinds of collaborations that we look forward to.
Right. Anyone wanna jump in on that? How can we enhance and ensure the effective enforcement of the MCCs? Okay. Oh, you want to? All right. All right. I think one thing that I sort of came to me, and I'm open the floor to the audience, which probably this question could be addressed later, is we are talking about just one instrument to facilitate cross-border data transfer. And one thing that I really want to ask about, but maybe we come back to this later, is pretty much where is it amongst all other kind of instrument or measures, right? We talk about, we know that some lines are quite clear, like BCR, that's like within GRIP, but we know that there's adequacy, it is government to government, or some other ways in which we can safely transfer data cross-border. Where is it that is MCC would place itself, which kind of transaction in particular that it fits really well? So probably we can talk about that later. But first of all, if there is any questions from the floor, it's your time. We still have time for quite a few questions before the end. Is there anyone who would like to ask any question? We have mic for you. I mean, this lady over there, please.
Thank you so much for this very helpful discussion. So I have a question, actually two questions. The first one is about the module of the MCC. As you mentioned that there are two modules, right? The module of data controller to data processor, and the other one is data controller to data controller. So I just want to understand in what aspect of this module of data controller to data controller, whether it's applicable for independent data controller or whether it's applicable to joint controllership. This is my first question. And my second question is that, is there a possibility in the future that ASEAN MCC or maybe other ASEAN future cross-border transfer guidance that you will reflect ASEAN's countries' local requirements there as well? Because I understand that we aim for the law harmonization, but right now we still have difference in terms of the requirements of the law, right? I think the good example here is the data subject right? For Thailand, Philippines, Singapore, we have 30 days for data controller to come back to the data subject request. But for Vietnam and Indonesia, right, they only have 72 hours, which is quite tight, right, for us to respond to the data subject request. So this is like, the difference in terms of the requirements. So I'm not sure whether like, I just think it has kind of like, if we reflect all these local requirements into the MCC, I know that it's going to be very lengthy, right? But I'm not sure whether we can do it in the means of like adding in the appendix or maybe the specific clause, like if Vietnam is in scope, please use this provision or something like that. And also, when we talk about the cross-border transfer, right, there's also like the filing requirement as well. For example, in Vietnam, the regulator also require the TIA, transfer impact assessment. And for Indonesia, right, also the new law is going to be implemented in October, 17th October this year. The law was announced 2 years ago with the 2 years grace period. And but you know, there is the requirement under the Ministry of Communication, IT of Indonesia in 2016 that announced the cross-border transfer filing requirement for the electronic system operator to file the cross-border transfer filing with the regulator if they use any platform or electronic to transfer to the abroad. So yeah, I just want to ask in terms of the possibility that maybe it will be helpful for the user that all these requirements will be reflected in the guidance in terms of the cross-border transfer. Thank you.
No, thank you. So just to recap, the first one is on the modules, right? And especially in the context of joint and independent DCs. And the second one is concerning the discrepancy of the requirements across jurisdictions and should or should not to incorporate these discrepancies into the MCC. All right. Anyone would like to take? So let's start with the first one, shall we? The modules.
Maybe I can go first and then other speakers can jump in. So I'm just going to actually address the two questions, maybe briefly. So you focus on the controller to controller module, and that also applies for the basis of joint controllers as well. So the example would be if you actually process the data with the same purpose, but then you have two organizations across two countries so that you can use the data, the module of controller to controller. And in the guide itself, actually, maybe you have a chance to look at it. It actually provides some examples of what could be the examples of when we are going to use the controller to controller module. Moving on to second question, I think this is the good question. And after having looked at the MCCs with all the explanations, a book that comes into it, I come to actually think about how the writer of the ASEAN MCC's book actually come to the conclusion of having put all those points about facilitating the access request among two parties to be the optional clause where they can actually agree on the terms about the time frame. So if you look at the template themselves, the clause that says about the facilitating access requests or other requests of the data subject rights, they can actually have rooms for both organizations to agree on the time frame, because like you mentioned, in Thailand, the access requests, we have the time frame of 30 days, but then other jurisdictions might be longer. So that will be the clause that you can put as the additional clause, for Thailand. For example, if we do a company in Thailand, then we have a counterpart, maybe Vietnam. So you can say that in terms of facilitating the access request for Thailand, we have these days, and then if the access request is actually go through to the company in Vietnam, you have to do it within your own time frame within the legal requirement of Vietnam. So if you look at that, I think the template provides quite a good picture. So I'll just address the two questions, and then let's see other speakers also address the questions as well.
Yeah, anyone would like to pick it? Yeah, please, Francis.
So maybe I will just I will echo what Dr. Papanpong has said also. So actually, the ASEAN MCCs itself, through the use of optional clauses and those clauses where you can specify your own requirements, for example, the timelines, and also the fact that you can add clauses into the ASEAN MCCs itself. So you don't have to keep to the template itself. That these are ways to allow for the different regulatory requirements in a jurisdiction to be incorporated. Why we don't have ASEAN MCCs containing all the requirements is because the ASEAN MCCs is very calibrated, right? So for example, if they are maybe when it first came out, half the ASEAN member states do not have data protection regime, they don't have regulatory requirements, and yet you have an appendix with regulatory requirements, then it will look very imbalanced, because those appendix requirements would lean heavily towards certain ASEAN member states. So at the ASEAN level, whatever initiatives that we come up with usually is by consensus, so we are very mindful that any initiative is does not favor or too biased towards any member states. So I don't think we will come up with such a document having very prescriptive requirements contained within the document itself. What we can agree on is a general template with enough flexibilities to accommodate the different requirements in each jurisdiction. Thank you.
Right. But maybe I'll just add something which is quite interesting. Because I don't see much difficulty, maybe I just don't see in practice, right? Because if you have two jurisdictions with like different time frame, normally you would go to the shorter one, because the one who need to sort of report first would need some kind of notification first. But if you go to the jurisdictions where there's no time frame, basically you just agree upon to sort of refer to the jurisdiction which has a time frame. So there might be some other cases, but I can't think of any other cases. Right. But yeah, thank you very much. Is there any other questions on the floor? We still got time. Oh, yes, please. The mic is over there.
Good morning. So my name is Dr. Nawanantira Phonpan. I am also a member of the PDPC committee in Thailand. I have a question, and first of all, I would like to thank you, the session, for a very informative and insightful understanding about ASEAN MCC and the cross-border data transfer in general in various contexts. My question is about the ASEAN MCC's modules, where there are two modules, as we know, the controller to controller and controller to processor. And my question is about when we deal with other jurisdictions like in the EU, where, let's say, for example, is the context where in Thailand or in Singapore, we are the processors as opposed to a controller, and we need to transfer data to other countries like in the EU, where they are the controllers, for instance, or processor to processor. I wonder because the EU ACC, I believe they have both the controller to processor, controller, and also processor to processor or processor to controller as well. But the ASEAN MCC does not have that, those two modules. My question is, how do you reconcile or harmonize that in the context of Thailand or Singapore's controller or processor working with other jurisdictions, given that that would perhaps means we need to adopt the EU SCC in that regard, or navigate other ways to negotiate the contract, which may be quite difficult without helpful templates like the MCC. And the next line of question would be whether there is a plan for perhaps adding the two missing modules to the ASEAN MCC in the future.
Okay, well, the question speaks for itself. Anyone would like to pick that one?
Yeah, maybe I'll just, I can start first. So actually we encountered this issue at the ASEAN level when we were working with the European Commission on the joint guide to the EU SCCs and ASEAN MCCs. Because the reality is that for European companies, if they need to transfer data out of EU, they have to use the EU SCCs. Because of the nature of that transfer mechanism, it is very prescriptive and mandatory. There is no room for the European company to adopt another template. So in the joint guide itself, we do clarify that actually it depends on the data flows. So let's say if the ASEAN company and the EU company is in a business dealing where the data flows from EU to ASEAN, or let's say it has to be both ways, then the reality is that EU SDCs have to be used. In which case, the joint guide is there to help the ASEAN companies understand what are the requirements of the EU SDCs and how to comply with them. But there might be also situations where in such a business dealing, the data flow is only from ASEAN to EU. So for example, the ASEAN company might be outsourcing something to an EU company, but they don't need personal data to come back. It could be a report that comes back or insights that come back. So the data flow from EU back to ASEAN does not contain personal data. In those kind of situations, then actually ASEAN MCCs is enough. You don't need EU SCCs. Then the joint guide also comes in to help the European companies understand, first of all, that, actually the European Commission has said something about ASEAN MCCs, and they can understand how those ASEAN member states have what kind of practices they have. So when, for example, when the personal data is collected in ASEAN, what processes do they put in place? How do they protect? So when the European companies receive the personal data, they also have some assurance of that it is legitimate. Yes, so that is my response for this question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's also about time that we use time so efficiently. But what time is it exactly? Okay, I think it's about time, but maybe for one last question, if anyone has it. Well, I think we're probably going to be sticking around anyway, so do find us. We're going to run away, maybe. But do find us and ask any questions should you have. I think Francis probably won't be hanging around because you are still in Singapore. But I look forward to see you next time. Please do join us here in Thailand. So thank you very much for well, the wisdom that we learned and the information that we get. I think I learned a lot myself, and I believe that all of us here appreciate the knowledge and the information that we got as well. So please, together with me, thank you our panelists again, Assistant Professor Dr. Prapanpong Kamon, Ms. Wai San Wong, Mr. Francis Chang, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your attendance and your attention in this morning session. So that's it for this morning session. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I extend our heartfelt thanks to our honorable speakers and moderator for the valuable contributions and insight for today. It has been very nice listening to our speaker and moderator today, and just right in time. We hope that next time we're going to have more time for all of you to enjoy the topic of MCC. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have the delectable lunch together. But before that, may I ask for your kind cooperation to scan the QR code going to show here on the screen, right? As shown here on the screen, in order to fill in the evaluation form. Any kind of your feedback, your comment is so valuable to us, PDPA and PDPZ, in order to develop our conference for a better conference in the future. And more than that, may I ask for your kind cooperation as well to return the language translator earset before we go have lunch together, in order to protect for the loss, right? And before you get back here in the afternoon, you can ask for the language translator earset one more time at the registration desk. So we will prepare the new one for all of you, so you can use it once again in the afternoon. So for those of you who may not be able to be with us in the afternoon, please return your device as well before you leave the venue. And we'll get back here to rejoin the session in the afternoon at 1:15 p.m. So right now is noon sharply. Okay, you have time, and see you again. Have a nice lunch and get back here at 1:15. Thank you very much. ขอบคุณค่ะ